of houses by the where the complaints are for the animals there, all the way out to Blue Line. Is that the area?
That is
in
correct.
question?
It is. It's the land as you come in from Port Dover on the west side.
Yeah.
You come into the urban boundary. So it's basically after you pass Blue Line Road, you get to the urban boundary. It's all the lands that would be to the south or on your right, right down to Radical Road.
Okay.
So it's a considerable parcel that needs to be
And I thought the idea of the, the concept of a secondary plan, this seems different to me, and I understand it. I think it's to consolidate owners, or you've got different ownerships, or isn't that part of it?
Yeah,
like trying to bring different owners together.
Through the chair, we use the term secondary fairly loosely because I know we talk about a downtown secondary plan.
Yeah.
These are maybe just a generic term. This is really about functional services, how we're going to service things, where the roads are going to go, and so on. And we're really looking at, you're correct, in previous years we'd be dealing with multiple owners. This is about one owner.
Okay.
So it's
it makes it a lot easier then.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. Any further questions on the priority rank 2 new budget initiatives? Seeing none, do you have any questions, gentlemen, on the priority 3 rank new budget initiatives? There are actually 3 pages of those. I guess we've talked about a couple of those already. Sorry, Councillor Black. I know your question about Port Dover West was in the priority 3 ranking. That's fine. Any other questions, Mayor Luke?
Mr. Chair, you're on ranking 3.
Yes, we are.
Quick question to Marlene Miranda. I assume on the second page of this that anything with health, social services, housing, those figures are all our 60% portion or whatever the balance is from the ministry supported?
Through the Deputy Mayor, that is correct.
That's correct. I wanted to make sure. Thank you.
You're welcome. Councillor Wells?
Deputy Mayor, just a quick question on financial services student, accounting clerk student for financial services at 0.35. We already have a student and we're putting, increasing the level of commitment, or are we going to look for somebody at 0.35?
Mr. Johnson?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Currently, the Financial Services Department does not have a student, and we wanted to put one back in because I would think there's 3 of our current staff have been students when we did have a student, and it's been a very successful program to bring in, whether it be a co-op student through a university or a summer student. It's been very successful to get the education, not only for them to learn, but for them to learn about municipalities and to actually want a career in a municipality. And I would say we have very good success stories in the finance department with students, and I would like to bring one back in because for whatever reason we lost that FTE over the years.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
You're welcome. Going once, going twice, and a third time. Yes, Councillor Brunton, priority 3 rankings.
Well, I see we got a new health inspector on there, and I'm just, I don't know how Marlene comes up with these, but and I'm not asking right now, but I just wonder if it might be wise to wait till we see where things are going with the province here. I have a great concern with that, and are we getting by with what we have now? They seem to be doing the job.
Marlene, please.
Sorry, I'm just looking for my notes.
Yep, okay.
So through the Deputy Mayor to Councillor Brunton, there are significant increases in inspections with many added inspections over the years with many different programs. And there are some new ones coming, i.e. the salary disclosure the label menuing, et cetera. So there is a significant workload, as you'll see in January once you see the details of the new budget initiative. I don't disagree with you that we should wait for the outcome of the expert panel. However, we will likely know that, I would expect, in the new year, and we could consider this in a temporary basis to offset the workload that we're currently experiencing with the increased demand on the PHIs and the programs.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Wells. Ms. Robinson.
Through the Deputy Mayor to Council. The purpose of this is we do not currently have the location of all of the signs in Norfolk County. There is a plethora of street names of signs, some of which are regulatory and some of which are not. And we do not know where they are or exactly where. We get surprised when somebody calls up and says, the sign went down, we didn't even realize that the sign was there. As a result of all of the changes that have happened, we've never actually had the opportunity to do an active inventory of all of that particular infrastructure. We've been pretty good at getting up to speed with all of our other infrastructure, but this is one of the ones that is significantly missing. With technology the way it is, these companies actually have the ability to actually drive, much like the Google Street View van drives around and takes it all. They actually use the similar technologies. They GPS coordinate everything so that at the end of the day, we will have a much better record of where everything is. We'll be able to document it. We'll have inventories of all of our signs, the exact locations, etc. It will make it much better for us in terms of liability with respect to any potential future lawsuits, etc.
Thank you. Further to this, Councillor?
So the person or the company that we hire has the expertise. We just couldn't hire somebody that could drive around and say, this is a stop sign and this is a four-way stop and this is a yield. So it's more than that? It's the price tag that I worry about.
Through the mayor, or sorry, through the deputy mayor to council, we could certainly hire somebody to do that, but in order to actually officially locate them, every sign that person has to get out with a handheld GPS unit to locate that sign and enter all of that information. We figured out that it was one student, it was going to take them approximately 3 years to do all of, like working year round, to do all of the signs that are in Norfolk County. This company has the tech, these types of companies have the technology that they drive it, and then and the way they record everything, they don't have a person doing it, a computer program does that, and then they do the checks and all that sort of stuff, so it ends up being cheaper to use a firm rather than hiring somebody to do that, because that was our first thought.
She does. But thank you for the question. Councillor Breton next.
Just on the same issue there, Lee, that figure is to do the whole county in one swoop. Could it be phased?
Through the deputy mayor to council, it certainly could be phased in. I would expect that the cost phased in will be higher because there'll be multiple mobilizations and all of that sort of stuff, but it could certainly be done. Again, excuse me, you'll note that it was ranked as a 3. It's not being legislatively required, but we do truly think that it is something that would be very beneficial to this municipality to actually have all of this information available and to be able to create a program for the replacement of signs in a timely manner.
Yeah, I like, it's certainly a great idea with the GPS, so. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for those questions. Back to you, Mr. Johnson. I think when you were giving us your intro to this part of the agenda, you indicated that the ranked 4 items are there FYI. You weren't intending to go over them or to have us ask detailed questions?
Yes, Deputy Mayor, that is, so the rank 4 is basically what SLT has deemed not to include into the budget in January, and it's strictly for information purposes that we do go through these and rank them.
Thank you. All right, Council, I think with that, we've covered those new budget initiatives. To you, James, and County Manager, how much longer do we think for this afternoon's session? And I'm only asking in the context of a break at some point if we are not within 3/4 of an hour of being done?
I believe we are. We have one slide for council-approved
Yep.
initiatives.
So a
then
question
we-
to council, are you prepared to continue on if we're targeting to finish by 3 o'clock, or would you like a break? Okay, let's take a 5-minute break right now, and then we'll come back refreshed. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to take your seats so we can get started again, please. You're just running to get out, I think, eventually. All right, thank you very much, folks. We'll reconvene with the hope of being finished by 3 o'clock. I know Councillor Columbus has to leave then, perhaps others. So, Mr. Johnson, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Albert.
Just give them a second, James, to settle down, I guess. When you're ready, gentlemen, please carry on, James.
So this slide is the council-approved initiatives. The total dollar amount of $596,900 was identified, sorry, $694,900 was identified in the earlier slide that Kathy went over when we were talking about the 7.5%. So if there's any items there that council would like to discuss. If not, we can carry on. So we will now carry on to Mr. Slichenkov, who will do a presentation based on minimum wage changes.
Yes, just hang on one sec, Yakov. Councillor Breton, are you still on? Oh, all right. I'll entertain that as long as it's quick, because we just finished that and no one put their hand up. So I'll allow a question, Councillor Breton, if you turn your mic on, back on the council-approved initiatives.
Well, I just wanted to ask the county solicitor issue again with the
county solicitor? We don't have one here yet.
No. Well, we got one.
Yeah.
Anyways, if I'm right, remember with the details of this, you felt that his salary would be offset by the reduction in our legal fees. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
And do you feel, was there a surplus included with that?
No, in fairness, this corporation is budgeted between $350,000 and $370,000 for its legal spend in each of the last previous years. Last year we spent $534,000, and the year before was $520. I don't remember the last number, $520 something. So we've spent about $180,000 more than budgeted each of the last 2 years. So there is no surplus because we've been so enormously over budget as a corporation as to be, well, I don't need to, you can characterize that any way you wish, but it is seen as net zero to the levy because the person will be able to save more than our new solicitor who we announced. And Mr. Loeb will be able to save more than the value of his salary.
Okay, but so when we see the budget, obviously he'll have a salary, but in the budget it will be reduced from what we normally. Is that how you plan on doing it? I mean, we budget so much for legal service, right?
So they're challenging answers to fair, straight questions. As you'll recall, we are aware, or we were aware, that there's going to be a transitional phase. So work that's currently with the outside firms is going to continue. If you're working on File A, you're going to keep working on File A. It's just that File B is going to go to the county solicitor. So there won't be the immediate savings right off the bat. There'll still be costs. So in that sense, there'll be two costs for a relatively short period of time.
Yeah.
Beyond that, because the spend has been more than $500,000, but the budget's only, and I'm talking about little bits of budget everywhere, I can take away all the budget. If we take away all the budget, there's still that $180,000 in excess spending, which happens to be roughly what we think it'll cost to run a county solicitor, by the way. So really, the first year, the whole savings could just be the overage, and you could still spend 100% of the budget. And
okay,
right, so
all right. That's why you show no figure in here, though.
In future years, there will be noticeable savings. In the first year, both because of the 180 overage we've had for each of the last 2 years, plus the need for the transitional period, I don't know that we can show that on paper, or we can bring all those budgets down to zero, but we're going to overspend again.
Well, I guess that's why you show it in here with no salary, is what I'm saying in this. You just show the full-time equivalent.
Yes, because it's so difficult during the transitional period to give you a straight answer.
Thank you for the question and the answer. Jakob, back to you. Carry on.
Thank you, Deputy Oliver and Council. So as you have been reading about in the paper, as you heard from me a few weeks ago, Bill 148 actually passed yesterday. And so most of those impactful provisions are coming into effect, and it's happening. In sort of that general term, as I also updated Council with some sort of a general preamble. There were success from the lobbying organizations in convincing the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and the Ministry of Labor in removing some of the more costly provisions that would have significantly impacted municipalities, and those were the provisions surrounding the on-call, the volunteer firefighters, and the impact in that regard. However, there are other provisions. So for the purposes of this presentation, it will focus specifically on the minimum wage changes. That's not to say that that's the only thing in Bill 148. There is a significant amount of various legislation that's being changed. It's touching on the Labor Relations Act, the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the Employment Standards Act, and sort of you will see more of me in the future providing you general information in that regard. But that's what we're focusing for the purposes of the 2018 budget drivers, the minimum wage. So the Bill 148 is actually called the Fair Workplaces and Better Jobs Act, and effective January 1st, 2018, that general wage is going to be increasing to $14. And the primary question and the consideration that we gave in planning for 2018 is what does that look like and what are the primary areas that are impacted by that. And so the second bullet point talks about the summer students that work for Norfolk County. And right now we have a range as far as what their wages are, and depending on where they are employed across the organization, and the following slide you'll see that breakdown. There's a range in what salary they're paid based on the sort of the functions that they provide for us. And to sort of follow suit with past practice, that amended wage, considering the minimum wage, would be $14 to $20.25, which is an increase from what it used to be, $12.75 to $19 per hour. There is a provision in Bill 148 that talks about equal pay for equal work. And the general principle behind that, if there's a part-time individual that's substantially doing the same type of work that a full-time individual would be doing, that they should be paid the same wage rate. It's not unusual in municipalities, and as far as our casual parks and facilities maintenance staff go, the casual staff would get paid a lower rate for doing substantially the same type of work that the full-time staff would do. And so the legislation addresses that they should be paid at the same hourly rate as opposed to a different one. So you'll see in the following slide what the cost implications of that would look like. And sort of the other general point that I'm making in that same slide is that although the minimum wage has an immediate impact from a dollars and cents perspective, it also has the potential to create what are called compression issues. And compression issues is sort of a general term to describe what happens where the gap between a less experienced individual and a significantly more experienced individual from a pay perspective is very low. And it could be in the same job band. Alternatively, it could be in two different job bands where, once again, the wage rate of an unexperienced individual and the wage rate of a very experienced individual are quite similarly close, because essentially minimum wage brings your lowest paid staff up, and if everybody else remains the same, that gap is closing. And there's various impacts of that. It could be getting you in a position where it's potentially demotivating for the staff that are more experienced to be so close to the minimum wage. And if it's also a protected group, that impacts your pay equity compliance, which could drive costs in that regard, which requires significantly more analysis and work, and we will be looking at that in the future as well.
I have a question for you before we leave this slide, Yakov, if you don't mind. The third bullet that talks about equal pay for equal work, and using the example of Mr. Cridland's Parks and Facilities maintenance folks, I gather we have people in that situation, and I know there's another slide where one may be a casual part-time, another one is a permanent full-time, but the job title is the same, is the job description the same, or will we as an employer be able to refer to perhaps even small differences in job descriptions as justification for not having to implement that part of this act?
So I can tell you quite explicitly, intentionally, I think the legislation uses the word substantially the same language as opposed to the same, and that is to prevent employers for attempting to use a couple of words there or a couple of sentences here or a couple of duties there to make that distinction. It doesn't have to be actually the same job. Okay. It could be substantially the same, and that gray area is specifically to prevent us from doing so.
And will we have to proactively go and make those changes, or will you maintain the status quo until an employee says, I'm being discriminated against? And just like in the old days of pay equity, it almost requires the employee to launch the request to have it reviewed. How will it be implemented from that perspective?
So the reason that it is in your 2018 budget drivers is because we will comply with the legislation. We're obligated to comply with the legislation as it's tabled and as it's moving forward.
Okay.
It is not going to be wait until somebody complains that we're not compliant. And quite honestly, from a pay equity perspective as well, if the any employer through a process of reviewing pay equity is aware that there's pay equity issues, the employer is obligated to fix those. It's a little different because sometimes it takes a while for those reviews to happen. Technically, everybody's supposed to be monitoring those on an ongoing basis.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next slide provides you a bit of a breakdown of where our summer students are. And I think from this slide, you see the diversity of the work that the summer students are involved with. They're critical to an organization. I think, you know, every municipality is sort of being asked to do more with less, and the diversity of the staff and the students and the critical nature and the additional sort of people power hours that they provide to sort of the various areas of the organization they work in is instrumental, and we really benefit from those. And I think you heard just earlier from our treasurer that we're actually in the practice of hiring our summer students as well, so it's been excellent from a succession management and a training perspective. We have students coming in, we're exposing them to our corporation, and we're training them, and then we're bringing them into employment opportunities and serving the communities that they come from. So a lot of benefits from that.
Okay, just before you move on, Councillor Wells, I think had a question.
I don't have a question, just a comment, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I've been here for quite a while, and I've never truthfully, I've known we've hired summer students in the past, I know that, but I've never known until I've seen this piece of paper here before me. We have 147 summer students. I would have never guessed that. That's all I wanted to comment on.
Thank you. Carry on.
So this is a comparison, assuming sort of the changes in the rate as a result of the minimum wages and in the bands, and assuming that it's the same amount of students and the same amount of hours from 17 based on the new rates in 2018. You sort of get an opportunity through this bar graph to see what those changes constitute per division in our organization. And then this is a slide that summarizes those costs, and you sort of saw those in some of the earlier slides that Mr. Johnston provided, sort of budgeting for that in 2018.
Councillor Brennan?
Question through you. Will you be looking at the number of students you hire and possible reductions?
I think that's a topic that I believe on a regular basis goes to SLT for discussion, but not having been privy to that before, I can't speak to it in more detail.
Okay, and not just reducing the numbers, but possibly other ways of performing those tasks?
Quite honestly, based on the wage rates that summer students receive and alternative means of doing some of that work, summer students, quite honestly, are probably the cheapest way of getting some of those functions completed and getting the benefit of those additional sort of people power.
My familiarity with students was that a lot of full-time staff in the summer months took vacation, and they would fill in and help with that. But we used to look at the contracts and how we would allocate. I mean, if everybody took their holidays in the winter, we might not have any truck drivers, for example, to plow snow. So, you know, there are some things in our collective agreements that should be looked at that possibly reduce the number of students we have. I would hope you're looking at that.
Certainly from a collective bargaining perspective, sort of the area that I'm responsible for in leading and championing collective bargaining, we make sure that we get the feedback from all the general managers and their managers within them surrounding deployment issues or any concerns they have with the collective agreement surrounding any limiting issues or minimum deployment verbiage, and looking for opportunities in that regard as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Mayor Luke.
Well, I'm in the same line of thinking as Councillor Brunton on this one. When I look at this graph through you to Mr. Sluchenkov, the math tells me it's going to cost us an additional $125,000 in 2018 to do the same thing that we did in 2017. Well, it doesn't seem like a lot of money, $125,000, but it is a lot of money. And it's something that is passed on to us from up above. As a matter of fact, it's 9% increase in 1.4 million. So I would strongly urge staff to take a good look at reducing the numbers. We're going to be out of business here shortly, folks. I'm all for hiring students, absolutely. We got to keep things going, but I hope this is something that you take a good look at, trying to keep this as much in line as we can and still cover the basics for the 2 or 3 months in the summer. Thank you.
Thank you. Carry on.
So the next slide talks about, in the same order that I brought it up, the Parks and Facilities Maintenance casual position, and assuming the use of that position in the same way as it was in 2016. And the reason why 2016 is used is that is a complete year as opposed to 17, and we're not finished that. And using the hours used in that year, using the sort of adjusted rates based on the equal pay for equal work provision. So a similar slide to the one you've seen before.
I would like to ask a question on this one, Yakov, and again, I guess it's mostly Mr. Cridlin, and maybe I shouldn't make this kind of suggestion or request publicly, but again, when you look, that's going to be a huge increase in cost to go from the rate we have paid the casual part-time to equivalent pay as to the permanent full-time. Are there opportunities here, if those are casual positions and therefore ones that would have to be re-employed each year, are there opportunities there in terms of using student labor rather than casual part-time labor to avoid having to make that comparison? I'm sorry. Okay, perhaps Mr. Sluchenkov, you take a crack at it first, Yakov, if you understood my question adequately.
I think it would really depend on the work being performed and the qualifications and the dangers of all of those jobs, and it's depending on what that work requires, students may not be an appropriate use in those circumstances, but more specifically I might.
Go ahead, Mr. Cridlin. Do you have anything to add?
Through the chair. No, I think Yakov did a great job. I look at some of the jobs that the casuals do when they fill in for a full-time. They need the refrigeration tickets, things like that. These are just things the average student doesn't come with for a majority of the jobs.
All right. Yeah, go ahead, County Manager.
From my perspective, the key consideration has to do with work covered by a collective agreement. Generally speaking, our union partners are fair, reasonable, and open-minded in their approach. They understand we have a number of collective agreements that will speak to the use of students. They allow for it and understand that. But we cannot take work away from individuals whose employment is covered by a collective agreement to provide it to students. We can typically use students to cover in absences generally, and or to augment for seasonal programs such as swimming pools. But generally we can't deliberately choose to say, I won't call you in at 24 an hour, I will call a student in at 14. That's generally prohibited by our collective agreements.
Okay, Mayor Luke.
I'm not sure if I heard this or not, but looking at this slide through the chair to Mr. Sluchenko, will we be in fact paying some students $23.75 an hour for 2018?
This particular slide isn't about the students, it's about the maintenance folks. So I don't believe we'd be doing that unless you're referring to the earlier slide. So the rate for the students is no student in 2018 would be getting any more than $20.25. And this particular slide specifically talks about the parks and facilities maintenance folks.
So this is not part-time?
These are not students.
These are not students?
They're not.
Okay, because certainly on the first page of where you referred to 2075, I didn't see that number. So would it be fair to say that some of our students will be getting $20.25 an hour?
Yes, if we continue based on past practice and using the ranges that we've used before, adjusting them by the minimum wage increase, it's quite foreseeable that some students would get 20,
and the new legislation forces us to do that.
The new legislation forces us to adjust the minimum wage. We've historically in this organization had ranges based on the type of work that and where the students are deployed to provide a range of what that salary grid looks like. And that was on the first slide. So you see here that up to the enactment of the Bill 148 requirement for the minimum wages, our range was from $12.75 to $19 an hour, depending where those individuals are deployed. Now, what the minimum wage legislation asks you to do is to bring up that minimum amount to $14 an hour. What the costing does is it uses the same approach of having a range and ranges that same amount, adjusting for the minimum wage.
Mr. Chair, I'll ask it a little different way. I don't know what minimum wage is. I think it's $11.60 an hour, somewhere in that neighborhood. And the new legislation will be $14, correct? 14
Yep.
a quarter, 14 minimum. So if currently I'm a student making in 2017, let's say $18 an hour, what you're telling me is even though we're going to increase the lowest wage from $11.60 to at least 14, why do we have to raise that $18 an hour? If it's a student, when we are well above the minimum, are we breaking any law by saying, whoa, wait a minute, we don't want to pay $20.25, say $700 a week, that's not a bad student's job. Do we have to go as high as 2025?
No, I don't believe that we have to. And historically, we didn't have to pay the ranges that we did, but those were established. My understanding was based on comparators and what other municipalities and how they structure these compensation packages. It wasn't just a matter of let's pay the students the minimum wage. So this particular costing assumes that we would follow with that practice, looking at municipal comparators and recognizing that not every single student assignment is the same, that work is different and would arguably require different payment. Is it foreseeable to say to everybody the minimum wage is this and that's what we're paying everybody? I guess that's a position one could take.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting that. I am suggesting this is a golden opportunity for our staff to look at the whole summer student rate of pay, because I think if you're at the upper end of $20.25 per hour, there'd be vacation pay on top of that, 10% or 4%, sorry, 4. Yeah. I don't know, I don't want to get into it right now, but I think this is a golden opportunity. I have had, Mr. Chair, complaints that why do we have to pay our students such a high rate of pay? And again, I'm all for hiring students and creating employment, keeping the ship going. This is a great opportunity to have a look at it. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, before we leave this, is this one of these scenarios? I think we all understand your point, and it was a very good point. There, I presume, would be nothing stopping the county from saying, okay, for those students that in 2017 were receiving the maximum hourly rate, which looks like it was $19 per hour, that rate is going to remain capped at that level for 2018. I don't know how many individuals that might affect, probably not too many, but that would be something that we could do as a corporation, but I think staff would need some sense of direction if that's council's
If I
wish.
may just finish on your
Sure.
line of thinking, and you've got the essence of what I'm saying. I understand legislation for minimum wages going up, but there's no legislation saying that you have to crank everything above minimum wage for a summer student up in proportion. I don't think there's any legislation that says that. I'm thinking it's perfectly legal to hire students at $19. And if they made that last year, why not next year? It's pretty good salary, pretty good working conditions for a summer student. Thank you.
Councillor Brunton on this point?
On the same issue, could you give me one example where we do that? Anybody, one department, someplace where we're paying somebody $19 as a student? Can anybody give me an idea?
Through the Deputy Mayor, I understand that our PHI students, which are partially funded through the ministry, are at that rate or similar to that rate.
So is that your doing, or is that some contract, or what is it? How did they get, who decided that?
Through the Deputy Chair, I'm not clear what your answer is. We've brought students, is my understanding, for many years to assist us through the summer months when many of our inspections are at a higher volume, and we do get some funding from the ministry to offset some of that practicum cost.
Doesn't say we have to, though. It's just, that's the rate somebody said, eh?
Through the Deputy Chair, the rate is determined by the county, is my understanding, but it's based on what would typically be provided based on the skill set of that person. You're hiring someone who's almost certified as a PHI and just finalizing their practicum and their work, is my understanding. So that would be a comparative rate, probably less than in other municipalities, that you would pay for such a skill set.
So you pay a public health inspector this $19 in the summer, where maybe he's got a second-year university or something like that. Is that what you're saying?
Through the Deputy Chair, they're almost at the end of their training, is my understanding.
Right. Maybe we can get a bunch of them and avoid hiring that full-time one, can we?
Through the
Thank you.
Deputy Chair, unfortunately, they can't perform many of the skills that a qualified PHI does and do need supervision. So utilizing them for those other roles would not be appropriate.
I think, Councillor, where we're struggling with this as councillors is we could see a student coming in to push a lawnmower as a first-year summer student getting the minimum wage, whereas an engineering technology student from college that's working in public works or a student public health inspector, those are different skill sets and legitimately are paid higher wages. Now, that having been said, there would be nothing stopping us from providing direction if that's what council wishes to do. Mayor Luke.
Last time, right on this page, we have been paying our summer students as low as $12.75 an hour.
That's right.
We must, by legislation now, go to $14 an hour.
Yes, for those who are over 18.
Yes, that's $1.25 an hour increase. At the high end, this also says we would be looking at going from $19 an hour, $1.25 to $20.25. Same thing, even though we don't have to do that. That $1.25 on 19 is almost a 7%. Who here is getting 7% increase? This is not right, folks. We have to do what we have to do at the bottom end, but we can save a few dollars off the top here. And if there's any student that does not want to work for Norfolk County for $19 an hour, I'm sorry. The greenhouses in the county are hiring adults right now for $11.60 an hour. Adults. So I think there's some work to do here and maybe a few savings. We'll leave it with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions then before we carry on? Councillor Columbus.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I agree with the mayor's thinking on this. This is $14 an hour. That's just the start of it. In future years, it's supposed to be going to $15 an hour. So, but to Yakov, I understand though that we do get grant money back from provincial, federal programs, do we not, for some of these student positions?
I think depending on where the position is and what it's doing, that's probably the case, but not for all of them.
Not for all of them. Okay, well, I think it's $19 an hour for student. I think there'd be a lot of students applying. As a matter of fact, I think a lot of students do apply for these jobs, just that unfortunately they can't all have a job at that kind of price.
Council, we've spent a bit of time on this topic. I think staff, if council has strong feelings about this, we need to indicate such to staff so that in January we've seen a reflection of policy or direction. Councillor Wells.
I think the mayor was very articulate in his request. He's suggesting that where we have to pay minimum wage, we pay minimum wage. But we leave it to the employer to look at the top part of the scale. And okay. I think if I heard him correctly, the top scale as it is identified in the report that we have is too high. Thank you. I didn't hear him say much about the numbers, but I did hear him say that the top scale is too high. So he has asked you, sir, to look at that when you were hiring.
Okay, but I'm going to ask council if you'll give me a consensus, a show of hands then, to reflect what I think has been the discussion around the table, and that is that the top level paid to student employees in 2018 remain at $19 an hour. Is that what you're essentially saying, Mayor Luke?
I'm saying that we look at the hourly rates of students that are currently above $14 an hour and have a look at them. They all do not have to be jacked up by $1.25 an hour each one. A little bit of an increase, 2%, that's what our full-time get. But not every one needs to be cranked up. It's the whole idea is the ones making $11.60 or whatever the number is, it's not a lot of money. I think that's the whole premise of the government.
Okay. All right. Then, okay, Councillor Breton.
I think we touched on the issue of let's look at the numbers. I think Councillor Wells, how many are there? 140? 147. I think we asked to at least look at the numbers and see if we can pare it down.
Well, I'm sure we can, but they're not going to do it unless we tell them.
Well,
that's
I'm
my
asking.
Suggestion.
I'm asking. Try to do it.
All right. I'm still seeking some direction here, gentlemen, whether it's all positions above the entry rate or whether it's just the maximum. I'm just asking for some guidance. I'll let Yakov speak first, Mayor Luke, and then I'll get back to you.
I think I'm hearing the conversation around the table very clearly that you want us to take it back and to look and to see what the jobs are like and whether the compensation structure in place is appropriate, especially with the increases of minimum wage. And I'd like to take that general direction and take that and work on it as a leadership team and bring something back to council sort of that makes sense, because there is a significant disparity between, summer students 18 years of age coming in, like you mentioned, to cut the grass at a facility versus what Ms. Miranda indicated are some of your higher level university educated students who, quite honestly, we would have to compete much harder for from a summer student perspective. So I want to be able to take that knowledge and sort of take it back and come back with a more analytical approach to that.
Okay. Is that satisfactory, council? Okay. Thank you very much. Do you want to carry on then?
So I think that finishes the minimum wage presentation. And because one of the councillors had mentioned it, the wage is scheduled to increase to $15 January 1st, 2019. And you will see that budget pressure in this iteration of this presentation next year.
Right. Thank you very much. Are you also going to cover the actuarial review of our self-insurance?
Yes, but I believe this is an in-camera item.
Oh, it is in camera, okay. All right. Mr. County Manager or Mr. Johnson, anything further that you want to have some discussion on in our open session before we cover this one item in camera?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the closed session memo was the last item for today, unless there was any open item discussion, further discussion or feedback, but that is the last item we were going to talk about.
Okay, I'm going to look to you, members of council. Any final comments that any of you wish to make regarding what we've been discussing today, or any further item as a lead-in to our 2018 budget in January? James?
I don't want to miss the opportunity to do a sincere thank you for the finance staff, specifically Kathy and Cindy that's sitting beside me at the table, and those that are probably eating our leftover lunch. Without their help, we wouldn't have been able to pull these numbers together for today, and I just wanted to publicly have a sincere thank you for all of them, and also all the divisions and departments for getting the information to us in order to provide information to council today.
Yeah, thank you for that, James. I know if Mayor Luke had been sitting here, he would have done the same thing to thank staff, particularly your department. I know we've all found this to be very useful. I'll get to you, Councillor, and so we too express our thanks to staff for giving us this initial briefing, this heads up, this food for thought, if you like, over the next 8 weeks or so to get us ready for budget. Councillor Black.
Well, yeah, I just want to repeat what you said, basically, as you know, and as mover and as seconder of the motion. I think it was very valuable exercise. I mean, it was a lot more laid back, preliminary information, high-level information, some new ideas, different directions, more thinking out of the box, a little cooler heads prevailing, and all of those good things. So I too would like to thank everyone, and in particular staff and James. I think they've done an excellent job in presenting the information, and it's much appreciated.
Thank you for those comments, Councillor. The clerk is just, sorry, Councillor Brunton?
One last thing I'd like to ask James, where are we going then with the one fund issue? Are we coming back with a report where we can make suggestions or comments on what we would like to see done?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Yes, I will be bringing back a report to council with a recommendation to adjust the policy based on the presentation today. It seemed like it was well received by council, so that will be the recommendation I'll be putting forth, but it will be in a report format so we can discuss it.
And when would that be?
I would say definitely after the new year, so February, March would probably be a good time after, because between now and the end of January we will be pretty pressed for budget-related items. So I think that would be a good timing.
Well, if I may, Mr. Chairman, it's important. It's very important when you look at what happened to us in the last year. So, anyways, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
At least our numbers are on the upward trend right now. We saw for October.
Well, yeah. I'll leave it. So.
Okay, I was just going to interject before Councillor Brunton raised his question. The clerk has reminded me this item